afternoon, everybody. My name's Helen Drury. I'm the International ESG Director for DC Advisory. The panel today is about demystifying ESG, and the purpose of this session is to get insights from the excellent panel that we've got to talk about equity, sustainability, and governance in the innovation economy. So we're going to talk through some practical examples of how the panel is implementing ESG in their companies. So I'd like to introduce the panel. So firstly, I've got Jamison Hill, who is a general partner at Base 10 Partners. Jamison joined Base 10 to advance the advancement initiative after spending 7 years at Bain Capital Ventures, where he led growth investments into marketplace businesses Cameo and Wonolo, and working with leading software companies Forkites and ShipBob, and fintech companies Finix and Flywire. Prior to that, Jamison worked at Bonobos, which was the first digitally native men's apparel brand, building out the brand's analytical capabilities across finance, retail, and marketing. He was named Forbes 30 Under 30 in 2016 and Venture Capital Journal's Rising Stars in 2021. He also serves on the board of Hope in a Box, which is a program that supports educators in building LGBTQ inclusive classrooms. I'm also joined by Salvador Sarabosing, who's from Blythe Global Advisors, where he's a partner. He leads their risk advisory services. Blythe Global is a boutique firm established over 10 years ago in Newport Beach. It consistently ranks among the top 10 management consulting firms in Orange County. Prior to this, Sal started his career at Ernst & Young, where he's built a passion in helping clients achieve regulatory compliance focused on financial reporting. He helps clients with Sarbanes-Oxley, SOC 1 and 2 reporting and service organization controls, and has built up an expertise in ESG reporting. As Sal says, compliance should be a business enabler. And finally, we're joined by Jay Coe, who is the co-founder and managing director of Lightsmith Group. Lightsmith Group is the first private equity fund to focus on investing in resilience to climate change. It's investing its global growth equity fund into companies with technologies and solutions that can manage the impacts of climate change in areas like agricultural analytics, supply chain analytics, and catastrophe risk modeling. He's got over 20 years' experience in private equity and sustainable investment. And importantly, he chairs the Global Adaptation Resilience Investment Working Group, which is a UN-formed working group. So I'd like you all to welcome the panel, and I hope it will be a very interesting discussion today. As you can see, we've got a really good mix of expertise across the environmental, social, and governance fields, so we'll be hearing from each of them. ESG is fast becoming mainstream. In the US alone, over $17 trillion was invested in green products in the last year. But it can be really hard to know where to start and how to navigate what I call the alphabet soup of ESG. It can often be difficult to know where to start and what issues to focus on. And importantly, it can be really difficult to get the data that backs up your claims and helps you manage your products and your services. So what we're going to do this afternoon is break down each of the ES and G and talk about some of the activities that they're working on. So Jamison, I'm going to go to you first. Base 10 is a venture capitalist firm with an impact growth fund. I'd really like you just to kind of explain about this and then also how you guys approached setting this up.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, it's great to be here. My name's Jamison. I'm a general partner at Base 10 Ventures. Base 10 got started back in 2017 around two core pillars: purpose and research. Research drives our investment methodology, and purpose is what drives the team. And so last year, we made sort of a deeper commitment to purpose that really aligns with the S in the ESG. And it really came out of the summer of 2020, a bunch of folks reaching out to myself, mainly founders, saying, look, we are horrified by inequality. We are horrified by what's going on right now. And more importantly, our employees are all horrified by inequality and the effect that that's having on us as a society. However, we have nothing in our toolkit that allows us to actually take action in a way that feels meaningful, particularly to our employee bases. And so we went away, we thought for a long time, and what we came up with was the first really mission-driven growth fund. And the mission behind our growth fund is to address systemic inequality in the United States. And the way that we do that is we looked across the US for where inequality was the most extreme. And we quickly centered in on historically black colleges and universities. And just to give you some sense of the inequality there, if you exclude the Harvard, Stanfords, Yales, mega endowments of the world, and just look at sort of the peer set of schools, the average HBCU has $15,000 per student. The average non-HBCU has $400,000. And so that's a 30x difference. And when we think about why it's been so hard to diversify tech, or all this discussion we've heard over the years about pipeline problem, I sort of trace it back to the fact that you've got a huge number of minorities on campuses with access to literally a 30th of the resources as their peers. So we designed a fund specifically to close that gap. And the way that we do that is we've invited the HBCUs as investors into our fund. And so they participate on a fee-free, carry-free basis. The rest of the capital comes from our mission-aligned foundations and endowments. And then we donate 50% of the return from the fund to the HBCUs who participate in the fund in the name of our portfolio companies. So in doing so, we've created a growth stage vehicle from a liquidity and a risk profile, but with the upside of an early stage fund through our carry donation.
And by focusing on that social impact, do you think that that's created a better financial return? And what's your kind of the value that you've seen from that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one thing I will say is, when we started out on the advancement initiative last year, we didn't know whether or not it would work. It was a big pilot program. We needed to make sure that not only the HBCUs would be excited about it, which I'll tell you they were, but the rest of our LPs would be excited, that founders would be excited to actually take this capital and use their cap tables in this way. And so what we found is not only is it resonating with founders, but it's resonating with founders of companies that we couldn't have dreamed of investing in a few years ago. And so we feel incredibly fortunate to be investors in companies like Attentive, Notion, Figma, Brex, Devoted Health. And these are conversations or rooms that I don't even think we would be in had it not been that the founders were so passionate about our mission and really actually saw our mission as supporting their own mission.
Great. And people often talk about the importance of diversity because it creates diversity of thought. Have you found that by focusing and improving that diversity, you're getting better innovations and better ideas that are coming through because you're having different points of view?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I would say our value proposition is very distinct and is very distinct in the market. And it just then opens us up to a different set of networks and opportunities that we can create for our portfolio companies. So to use a very real example of that, we invested in a healthcare company. One of the things that the healthcare company wanted to do was connect with nursing schools. We connected them with the nursing school at Howard and some of our other HBCUs. And those were introductions that sort of given resources, staffing, for a whole bunch of different reasons, would have been very hard for that company to get on their own. But because we have this fund specifically designed to support HBCUs, we were able to make that happen.
Great, that's really interesting. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'm just going to quickly go over to Jay to talk about climate resilience finance. You've got a very extensive history and expertise in this field, but it's also it's a complicated and technical area. So in a very layman's way, if you could just maybe outline some of those key risks and opportunities that tech companies should be aware of in terms of climate resilience.
That's great, and thank you, Helen, for having me, and to Jamie Montgomery. It's really fantastic to be here. I realize I'm the only human in the tri-state area wearing a tie, so I'll try to actually loosen that to pretend I'm actually in California. So I'm Jay Coe. I'm one of the founders and managing directors of Lightsmith. We're a dedicated global growth equity fund, as Helen mentioned, that's focused on climate resilience and adaptation to climate change. And so we're the first fund focused in this area. And what we mean by that is a lot of the world is now focused on the fact that climate change is happening. We should try to reduce that as much as possible. Some people describe that as mitigating the scale of the problem that we're going to see here. But what is now absolutely clear as we kind of see fires that I just heard about in Orange County just the other day is that adapting to climate change is now going to be a social and civilization imperative. We're already seeing gigafires and fire tornadoes, which we've never had terms for before. We've run out of names for hurricanes in hurricane season, and we're only at 1.1 degrees of warming. 1.5 billion people were under a giant heat dome in India and Pakistan a couple weeks ago, and under the second one just a few weeks ago. And the unfolding complexity of the environment that we're created for ourselves is now going to continue to get more severe and more complex from now till the foreseeable multiple decades. So that's a really pretty challenging problem and a humanitarian disaster for a lot of people. And it creates enormous amounts of genuine risk, not just to society, but to the economy and to communities everywhere. The flip side to that is that those risks create massive amounts of potential opportunity for technology and entrepreneurship and investment. If we're here at this conference 5 years from now or 10 years from now, I won't know what the outcome is going to be of the Ukraine war or the credit cycle or consumer behavior, but I'm reasonably sure 5 or 10 years from now at Montgomery Summit 2032 that the climate will have continued to have changed. And the question is, what technologies did we invest in and what kind of capital do we put to work against that extremely, I think, clear set of trajectories that we're on. So we're looking at technologies that actually manage the risk and impact of climate change. Fundamental technologies like digital mapping, catastrophe risk modeling and weather modeling, agricultural analytics, supply chain analytics. Most people wouldn't think immediately about supply chain management as a climate problem, but if you light everything on fire or you cause a drought that makes the Panama Canal not function perfectly, then you're going to disrupt the supply chain on top of the Ukraine war, trade disputes, and COVID. And all of these things will continue to become more complex. That's a challenge for society, but an enormous opportunity also for technology and investment. So that's what we're focused on. Growth stage companies that can accelerate their technology development. We need the tools to attack the climate change problem as it gets bigger. And that's an opportunity for investment, an opportunity for entrepreneurs and technology.
That's great. That's really interesting, even though it does feel very daunting to think of the challenge that we've got to address. If you're a company starting out today to really start thinking about your climate change resilience and adaptation, what first steps would you recommend that someone would take?
Well, fundamentally, I think you need to understand the two risk sides of the climate equation, which are, look, you have a carbon footprint. That's going to become more important over time. If you're very, very heavily intensive in energy, thinking about how to reduce that is going to be important, and disclosing what your carbon footprint is going to be important. The other side of it is the operating conditions are going to change, right? So here in California, hydropower is a really important source of electricity. It's considered to be sustainable and renewable, but if you have a drought and there's no water to run the Hoover Dam, then you don't have electricity anymore, right? So the point is you need to actually assume that the conditions under which you're going to operate your business, any business, a multinational with an extended supply chain, a new company with a new technology, has to account for the fact that we are now going to face a dynamic frontier of change and risk going forward. The flip side to that is that creates enormous opportunity. If you can dynamically reroute shipments and multimodal transport in the face of the Texas freeze or California fires or COVID, then you will take share from other software providers that actually manage the supply chain. If you know how to actually analyze medical diagnostics for childhood respiratory ailment, when you light everything on fire, demand for that is going to increase, and it should. We want the technologies and tools to be scaled so the problem that we face can actually be addressed. And that is an enormous opportunity for investors and companies and technologists.
Great, thank you very much. So now turning to the governance, as I said before, you've got an extensive history and experience working in ESG and compliance. Often though with ESG, people wonder, what's the governance and why is it relevant to sustainability? Can you just explain a little bit about some of those governance issues and why they kind of fall underneath that ESG category?
Yeah, absolutely, Helen. First of all, Jamie Montgomery, thank you for having us. Helen, thank you for having me on the panel and having Blythe Global Advisors presenting. Yeah, the governance portion is a very unique aspect of ESG. The governance portion plays a very significant role in that it is the accountability to businesses in their overall program of ESG goals and objectives. So this is where kind of compliance professionals kick in. I like to think of the E and the S as what companies do and the G as how they do it. Mm-hmm. So take, for example, a very simple ESG objective of hiring providers locally. In order to do that, you have to start to recruit the support of strategic sourcing. You have to recruit operations to understand that in the business. Maybe legal, maybe accounting. right? So you start to see that in order to really execute on even a simple goal, like local providers, you have to have robust processes and policies and procedures in order to get to that end goal. So the G really is the glue that kind of keeps that whole program moving, reporting, and accountable.
Interesting. So I've heard someone say once, compliance is only one step up from being illegal. So how do you advise companies to go beyond just that minimum element of compliance and see the value in that governance and that compliance, so that they don't just sort of see it as just that regulatory aspect?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of aspects to really helping organizations use compliance as strategic, right? I think in the ESG framework and in the current environment that we're in, ESG is critical. Mm-hmm. Organizations playing in particular fields and their contribution to carbon emissions is also critical, mm-hmm. right? So in and of itself, ESG is important. And being able to have a platform that helps investor confidence, helps strategic initiatives, in and of itself is strategic.
What advice would you give? So tech companies can often grow very quickly, and obviously getting that governance architecture in place can be difficult, and getting that in and not seeing it as red tape. So what advice would you give to smaller companies to think ahead so that they can prepare for that, so they're not kind of trying to build it as they're going, and it won't slow down their rapid growth?
Yeah, great question. I would break this into 3 parts. The first piece is, really know what your industry and know what your business requirements are around ESG. Or, said differently, what ESG matters are important to that industry and to that business. If you are in fintech, or you are in cryptocurrency, or you are in biotech, or other industries, there's going to be separate priorities for each business. So as you go down this startup journey, one of the first things to understand related to ESG is what ESG matters to that business, to that industry. That's the first thing that I would encourage startups. The second thing is to understand what your reporting requirements are. The reporting requirements are becoming more and more pervasive, more and more formal. And so the SEC has certain requirements, external audit has certain requirements, maybe your lending institution has certain requirements. So you really got to understand those as a startup as you embark on that journey. The third piece is create meaningful goals toward ESG. I had someone tell me in my career, over-promising and under-delivering is the worst thing you can do, right? And so it's the same for ESG, it's the same for reporting and the overall requirements to this initiative. So have meaningful goals, and be able to live up to those goals.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting. We were just talking just behind about greenwashing and some really recent cases. We were talking about in Europe, Volkswagen had fines and a scandal around misreporting on their carbon emissions. We were talking even just a representative from HSBC at a conference being suspended because he said that we were making too much of a fuss around climate change. So what you say and what you put out there is really important. You're judged on it. But we also know the data collection is really difficult. So how do people go about it? How do they balance, making their claims and really genuinely wanting to do the right thing, but then making sure that it's evidenced and it can be backed up? Jay, I'll get to you first.
Yeah, I think, the 2 things to think about here is ESG is not a fad. This is now going to be table stakes for a lot of large-scale institutional investors and asset owners, and then the underlying population whose savings and pension funds and insurance premiums that you're ultimately investing really care about this stuff. So this is just not going away, and it's good management. So the question is, if you align the way you're running your business and have the metrics that actually can help you measure that in a way that actually generates more value for your business, then you're going to be putting yourself in a much better position in very practical terms as well. So we invested at Lightsmith, for example, in a company called Tech. This is a precision ag company that covers about 75% of sugarcane production in Brazil and is coming to the United States. It has technology that networks together farming equipment and dramatically reduces fuel wastage. It reduces the application of fertilizers. It ensures compliance from an environmental standpoint of where and when you're applying different kinds of inputs into your agricultural field. So there's a compliance aspect that they are helping to fulfill, but they're also fundamentally reducing the cost of fuel and the cost of fertilizer, which in an increasing inflation environment that we're facing right now is just dollars dropping to the bottom line. Now, on top of that, because they have the ability to monitor the weather and have GPS, they can actually tell you how compliant the farmers that they're serving and the agribusinesses that they're serving are with anti-deforestation restrictions in Brazil. They can tell you whether or not they're responsible for chemical effluent going into the river. And the companies that they work with on client side, that's Tech, are then better off because when they have to do their reporting downstream, or they have to position their produce when they want to sell it into the United States or other places, they have tracked provenance. They can actually explain that they comply, and that's a value add for them. And in the climate context, we invested because agricultural stress is an increasing problem because of climate change. And so the more efficient you are with water, with fertilizer, with fuel, with other kinds of inputs, the more adept you are at adapting to a more complicated weather situation, the more adapted the entire agriculture and food supply chain is going to be to climate change. And by tracking the metrics around that, which we do, and reporting them, we provide our own stakeholders with that information. But in the context of that company, if it ever goes public or it's acquired by a strategic, the two types of investors it's going to face are traditional technology investors. It's an ag tech, precision ag company. Those sometimes are a little more volatile than you might want. But there's also an entirely new area and pool of capital oriented specifically at sustainability, at climate change, at ESG, that is probably a little bit more patient and an additive source of capital that is going to be around as part of the book that's built for that company when it actually goes into the public markets. So as an investor or as an entrepreneur, if you can align yourself with this macro trend and use it not just as a cost or a compliance requirement, you're going to have to do it anyway, but do it in a way that's smart and align your business model with that, you're going to be in a better position than your competitor who treats it like a cost or has to, after the fact, figure out how to get DEI or how to get no child labor or how to track provenance or how to do their carbon footprinting. And while they're playing catch up, you're going to continue to take share and you're going to be positioned for much larger pools of capital and the world that we're going to face.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Jamison, from a social perspective, and I also know you've got a background in data analytics as well, so talk us how you might kind of, because the environmental side is sometimes seen as a bit easier to measure, social side not so much. What's your kind of advice and kind of navigation on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I'm of the belief that you can't change what you don't measure. And so, yes, I think, most folks who I talk to who are people leaders or are founders are like, there are elements of measuring the diversity of my workforce that make me uncomfortable. Relying on self-reporting, I think, helps to mitigate some of those, not all of those. And we are still kind of trying to figure out, well, what is the full set of solutions that we need to properly capture the diversity of a workforce? And by the way, that diversity should go far beyond race and gender. There's a company that I really admire called Loom, and they're a startup that has actually published their full diversity stats on their website publicly for anyone to see. You can go to loom.com, I think /DEI or something like that, and you can see all of their statistics, which big tech companies have done on and off for years, but is very, very rare in the land of startups. And one of the most striking things about it is, not only are they sharing data on gender and on race, they're also sharing veteran status. They're sharing marital status, things like that, things that we may not think about in building truly an inclusive workforce, but things that are really important. If you cannot have a workplace where it's possible to have a family and be successful in your job, not only are you going to struggle perhaps to attract women, you're also going to struggle to attract a really broad set of men out there who also want to spend time with their kids and things like that. So it's thinking about diversity, I think, on every metric. We have signed up to the ESG Data Convergence Project. It's being run by the ILPA, which is a big LP organization. They are sort of, I think, $20 trillion of capital have signed up in private equity and venture capital in order to measure sort of 6 different categories, one of those being diversity. And so, we're starting at the basics where it's about measuring and then taking action from there. But maybe the last 30 seconds that I'll say, and then I promise I'll shut up, is just, to Jay's point, ESG is not just a passing fad. We're seeing that too when it comes to hiring. So, everyone talks about Gen Z and, how difficult it can be to add Gen Z to your workforce or build your Gen Z workforce. And part of that is because they see and have seen for their entire lives the societal problems that we're facing and want to be part of the solution. And so having that mission approach and appeal is important to building that workforce. And so in the same way that ESG is not, that our concerns about the environment are not passing, we have an entire workforce of people who are coming up who are more vocal and care more deeply about these social issues in the workplace. And we need to make sure that we're shaping these workplaces in order for them to be successful too.
Great, thank you. And Sal, just finally, what's your kind of advice on studying that data journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think really well said by Jay and Jamison. I'm going to echo, especially what Jay had mentioned earlier, that data is only as useful as the use of the data related to its benchmark and related to its goals. So the better your KPIs are that are tied to your business, the better that you set out goals and measurements for your ESG program, the better you could use that data. So as you lay out your program to collect the data and understand how to make decisions around it and change against it, you really have to establish clear and strong goals related to your business and what priorities and what matters to your business. And a little bit silly, but a good reminder, get support. There are a lot of experts out here. There's experts on this panel that really can help startup businesses, mature businesses navigate this ESG, environment and this platform. And we would love to help give our experience to help create a strong program.
Great, well thank you very much. It was a very quick whistle stop tour, so I'm sure quite a broad subject matter, but I think in terms of 3 key points, first of all knowing what are those material impacts, so what is the things that your sector is expected to look at, then really looking at your business model, where can you dial down those risks, but also really look at those opportunities. So I think Jamison's example is a fantastic example of finding that opportunity. And then finally, data. Data is absolutely king. So being able to manage what you can measure is really important. So collecting that early, having that time to be able to interpret it is really important for driving your ESG programs. So I want to say thank you very much, and I'd like to give a round of applause to the panelists for joining today. Thank you.